While working on this presentation, I have been very surprised by the many memories that have surfaced, and I'm grateful to Rabbi Lyon for giving me this opportunity for self-reflection. I have realized that Judaism has always been the mainstay of my identity as a Boston Jew, providing a solid base of self-assurance and confidence, and as I get older, becoming an even more important part of my daily life. My grandfather, Maurice Dorsitsky, grew up in Sevastopol, Russia. He emigrated, arriving in New York City in 1903. After working as a painter for a few years, he moved to the Boston area, married Esther, also from Russia, and became a naturalized citizen in 1918. My father was born in 1914 as one of 6 children. My mother was born in 1917, also the daughter of Russian immigrants, as one of 6 children. They were married in 1937. My brother was born in 1938. I was born 7 years later, on May 7th, 1945, the day Germany surrendered. I arrived just in time to celebrate. I grew up in Dorchester, Mattapan, a mixed ethnicity, lower income, white working class neighborhood of Boston, Massachusetts. A few of the families around us were Jewish, all with one primary goal: to fully assimilate as patriotic Americans. In elementary school, we began each day by standing up, putting our right hands over our chest, and reciting the Pledge of Allegiance. Since our radio was always on, I remember hearing Boston's Cardinal Cushing reciting the Rosary at 4:15 every weekday afternoon, a reminder of the city's Catholic influence. During Easter, we had colored eggs. During Christmas, the stockings were filled with goodies, in addition to the Jewish holidays. We were part of the melting pot, doing what was necessary to be good Americans. Our Judaism was there alongside motherhood, apple pie, and the flag. Intense drama was the best way to describe my family. We lived in a 4-room apartment in a 6-family wooden triple-decker. My brother Herb and I shared the back bedroom until he finished his sophomore year at Harvard, when we moved to an apartment in an adjacent neighborhood with 3 bedrooms. Herb would do most of his studying sitting in the bathtub, the only quiet area available. My father drove a cleaning truck, delivering dry cleaning to wealthy Jewish families in Brookline and Newton. Dad worked long hours, 6 days a week, for most of his life. In return, my mother constantly berated him for being only a truck driver and not showing more ambition. He did not measure up to the other men we knew in the Jewish community. My mother was the product of an alcoholic father and mentally ill mother. At one point, she and her 5 siblings became foster children, no doubt experiencing abuse in the process, until they were able to be reunited under her determined leadership. Evening meals in our house were routinely filled with my mother's wonderful home cooking, coupled with constant bickering about my father's inadequacies, his rotten family, who blamed her for taking their brother away from them, lack of money, in addition to other personal issues. What attention my brother and I did receive was focused on our report cards and household chores. My brother sadly remembers that he was frequently concerned with whether he would even survive, given the pressure on him as the firstborn son to be successful in school and make my parents proud. We did that, both turning out to be successful professionals. I attended the Dorchester Mattapan Hebrew School and high holiday services at its adjoining conservative Temple Beth Hillel. Hebrew school was Sunday mornings and daily, Monday through Thursday, following public school. I walked the half-mile to Hebrew school, frequently reciting the Lord's Prayer when encountering challenging situations along the way. In one class, we were learning the alphabet. In other classes, we studied the Chumash and Jewish rituals with teaching staff, many of whom were Holocaust survivors with heavy European accents, speaking in broken English and Hebrew. I never really understood what they were saying. We would routinely go into the chapel and synagogue auditorium for lessons with a heavy emphasis on proper decorum. Sit up straight, don't cross your legs, don't talk. After 6 years, I learned the basics, how to read Hebrew and recite the prayers, that everything written in the Torah had different interpretations, and that the Sabbath was the most important of all Jewish holy days. The experiences and learnings I had at Hebrew school did not seem to apply to my home life. Friday night was characterized by bickering around the dinner table while trying to enjoy my mother's cooking. Saturday was a regular workday highlighted by special TV programs. When it came time for the high holy day services at our synagogue, we sat where we could afford in the balcony. Two main activities stand out as disturbing. First, the exodus from the temple during the Torah reading. That was the time for the men to go outside and smoke, kibitz, and watch the kids run around. Second, the fundraising. Each family received a card with our name on it, with different dollar figures around the perimeter, one of which we had to choose as our donation. It seemed that this was the opportunity for the board of directors to make their plea from the bima one by one and cajole the members for support. Evidently, the best way to show how Jewish we were was by the amount we gave to the temple. Even more discouraging, the most frequent sermon topic was an admonishment from the rabbi for being just high holiday Jews and not taking the Sabbath seriously. On the other hand, the choir, organ music, and cantor chanting the prayers were beautiful and forever embedded in my memory. To this day, the music at Beth Israel brings me back to these early years and reaches to the core of who I am and the continuity of my life. The primary avenue for Jewish kids in Boston to advance and move up the economic scale was through Boston Latin School, a college preparatory public exam high school. My mother insisted that we go to this all-male central school where a sports coat, white shirt, and tie constituted the school uniform. I followed my brother there for grades 7 through 12. My father drove us there every day over a 10-year period on his way to work. There was never any doubt in our family that we would become professionals and bring honor to both our parents and the entire Jewish community. Being Jewish meant being academically successful. While in Latin school, I attended Hebrew high school for 3 years until the end of my junior year. These Jewish studies added to my religious interest and curiosity, and not necessarily to a deeper understanding of Judaism as a way of life. Given that we could not afford Jewish summer camp or a trip to Israel, that we did not have a kosher home or regularly observe the Sabbath or live in a predominantly Jewish community, I always had an inner conflict about what it really meant to be Jewish. Sometime during my early years in high school, my brother began attending the Unitarian Church in downtown Boston on Sunday mornings. He invited me to join him on one occasion. This turned out to be a turning point in my religious life. The 30-minute sermon seemed directed at me. I felt that here was a religious leader who truly understood what I, as a teenager, was experiencing. The readings were from American literature, and the hymns had lyrics that made sense. The service was an hour long. I was enthusiastically greeted by members of the welcoming committee who expressed interest in me and my next visit. From then on, I became a regular visitor, even after my brother lost interest. I had a place to express my religiosity at a time I needed it most, and I could still identify as Jewish without adopting any uniquely Christian beliefs. In 1971, the Vietnam War was still raging. Having delayed the draft for as long as I could, I was faced with either going into the military or 3 years in jail. With my master's degree in social work in hand, I entered USAF basic training in San Antonio, Texas for 6 weeks. It was a totally miserable experience. Two significant factors made it tolerable. The Jewish Community Center of San Antonio picked up all the Jewish basic trainees every Sunday morning for a bagels and lox breakfast. I felt I was being rescued and brought into the hands of civilization, even if it was only for 3 hours. People there appreciated my background and showed interest in what I was doing. I truly valued being Jewish and lived for these Sunday morning opportunities. The other mitigating factor was my master's degree. Because of it, I was commissioned a social work officer and subsequently remained in the Air Force for the next 14 years, serving in a variety of mental health clinics and programs. The best of my assignments was a 3-year stint at Brandeis University to earn my PhD in social policy. Once again, I was back in a Jewish environment and enjoying every minute of it. My first wife was a fellow domestic Peace Corps volunteer and Unitarian. We met when I was 20 and married at age 22. The ceremony consisted primarily of poems and excerpts from English literature. 5 years later, we had 2 children who received their religious education at Unitarian Sunday schools. Their contacts with Judaism were during the Jewish programs, which I led, and periodically with my parents during Passover Seders. The emphasis in our house was on living a principled life, accepting all religions as equally valued and important. My first marriage ended after 20 years. The initial differences in our upbringing grew wider as we developed into mature adulthood. The divorce gave me space to look more objectively at myself and my identity, trying to escape from an unhappy childhood by rejecting my parents' lifestyle and the Judaism which they represented no longer worked. As much as I enjoyed the Unitarian philosophy and its humanistic approach to life, it did not connect with the inner core of who I was. There was a discontinuity which I needed to overcome. When I met Jackie, I was surprised by how comfortable the relationship was from the very beginning. Just as I felt at home when I first landed in Israel a few years later, I had no trouble relating to her values and priorities. We shared a common heritage, a common language and sense of humor, both being brought up by Ashkenazi Jewish parents in the Northeast. We enjoyed Jewish cooking and regular religious rituals. We each were previously married with 2 children similar in age and education. It was a good fit. We have now been married 30 years, second time around. One of our first activities together was with a Havurah group from congregation Beth Israel, led by Rabbi Ernesto Jetta. We met once a month and discussed all aspects of Jewish life. I began working with him with the temple's singles group and day school. Jackie and I also attended the Alternative Family Sabbath service in Beth Yeshurun's meeting hall. It was a completely musical service which brought me back to the rituals and hymns of my upbringing. So here I was, attending a monthly Jewish study group with Jackie, working together with the rabbi, getting involved in synagogue programs, and enjoying Sabbath services. This was not the Judaism that I grew up in and found confusing. At this time, I was working with the board of the Mental Health Association, where I met Rabbi David Lyon, who was volunteering there as part of his first rabbinical assignment. While getting to know Rabbi Lyon, whom we have now known for more than 30 years, and subsequently attending high holy day services at congregation Beth Israel, I realized that Reform Judaism provided a religious, spiritual, and philosophical home where beliefs and actions were in alignment. The services were meaningful and challenging. Rabbi Karf was extraordinary in his ability to communicate empathy and understanding and talk directly to you from the bima. Rabbi David Kaplan, Beth Israel's associate rabbi, performed our marriage ceremony. We have traveled to Israel on 3 occasions. Touring Israel was a magical experience in that I felt at home as soon as we landed in Tel Aviv. As we visited different historical sites, I frequently thought that if I had these experiences during my high school years, my life decisions might have been very different. There were consequences for bringing my children up in a humanistic religious tradition. They are both loving, caring, successful people. They married very caring, equally successful non-Jews. They have nice homes and happy children, but not surprisingly, they are not bringing their children up Jewish. As I was raising them, I emphasized humanism, leaving out Judaism. At the time, I did not realize the significance of my Jewish background and upbringing, and did not anticipate the absence of events like the bris or bar mitzvah for grandchildren. It is a regret of my own making that I have to live with. What I have realized is that throughout my life, I have always been influenced by my Jewish upbringing. There were many twists and turns, yet I eventually came home to what was always inside me. Attending High Holy Day services at Beth Israel has provided a deep spiritual and emotional experience, from the first blowing of the shofar on Rosh Hashanah to the final shofar chorus at the end of the Yom Kippur memorial service. We love sponsoring the musical Shabbat services. Actively participating in the Beth Israel Book Club is expanding my horizons with a variety of Jewish literature. Regularly attending Melton courses at the Jewish Community Center has helped me see Judaism as a vibrant religion affecting all aspects of my life. If I only learned this when I was in Hebrew school. I have realized that being Jewish is more than a spiritual or religious identity. It is more than a cultural identity. It is a way of life expressed in every aspect of our being, transcending all else. It is reflected in all our actions, in who we are. Thank you, and Lashana Tova. Wow. That was surprising.
My early Jewish memories remain as vividly embedded in my memory as the days I first experienced them. Following my grandfather around the dark house with a candle, a feather, and a paper bag, searching for chametz the day before Passover. Watching my grandfather laying tefillin at the dining room table, reciting Hebrew prayers each morning, and listening to my father and his sister, Aunt Goldie, arguing about how many pieces of my grandmother's handmade gefilte fish each would receive. These are cherished Jewish memories that helped me shape the person I am today. I'm a fourth generation member of Beth Israel through my mother's family. However, I did not join Beth Israel until 1980, when my husband Stanley and I moved back to Houston to settle down. We had been married 7 years, and after medical school for Stanley, graduate school for me, we returned to Houston for Stanley's fellowship and to think about starting a family and really settling down to create our home. The thought of settling down immediately forced us to focus on the deep questions of how would we live our Jewish lives going forward. Stanley, who's from Pine Bluff, Arkansas, was very traditionally reformed, and I, a native Houstonian, had strong conservative, almost Orthodox roots. How would we raise our kids? How would I tell my parents that we may not be joining Beth Shalom, a congregation my parents helped found, the place where I was raised and married? Beth Israel came to mind. My best friends from growing up, Robert and Elise Kaplan, were members here. There was Schlenker School, and I knew Stanley would feel more at home at a Reformed congregation. I was not sure about me, but we decided to give it a try. I remember walking into Beth Israel feeling overwhelmed and anonymous. It was a huge decision to join Beth Israel, leaving my entire family, my father, my sister Luann, cousins, aunt and uncle at Bris Shalom. So I made the decision that the only way to feel part of this huge place was to get involved, meet people, and actively embrace all opportunities to participate. I quickly joined Sisterhood, and 2 years later, When I was leaving a sisterhood luncheon, I heard Rabbi Karf of blessed memory call out, "Bye, Marcia," and that was my sign. The rabbi knew my name. I must be home. I was no longer anonymous and really felt part of this large place for the first time. Judaism had been shaping my life long before I joined Beth Israel. I credit my paternal grandparents, Molly, and especially Sam Flans, with strongly instilling in me the importance of religious observances, family traditions, and being an active Jew. My grandfather escaped Europe and came to America in the late 1920s, losing his parents and most family to the Holocaust. In his synagogue, Sam Flans raised money by bestowing aliyahs at the early morning minyan that he conducted and required donations that he personally sent to congregation in Prague, close to the cemetery where his parents' graves were discovered when I was in college. I credit my grandmother, Molly, for instilling in me my love of cooking and the importance of preparing for holidays and all the traditional foods associated with them. She grated potatoes for potato kugel until her knuckles bled. Her matzo balls were always fluffy, and her gefilte fish was definitely worth fighting over. My parents, Ruth and Bernard Flans, both of blessed memories, were equally influential in molding my Judaism. They both led by example, serving as congregational and sisterhood presidents and leaders of the conservative movement. They were also instrumental in encouraging transformation within their conservative congregation, where on my bat mitzvah, Rabbi Moshe Kahana bravely made me the first girl to read from the Torah. At the time, I was oblivious to the fact that this was very controversial and did not know until much later in life that my grandfather was not initially supportive. My Jewish education culminated in a pilgrimage to Israel in 1969. At the same time, the U.S. was at war in Vietnam, and the first men landed on the moon. I admit that initially I saw the pilgrimage as my only opportunity to escape Houston for 6 weeks with my parents' approval. But this experience was life-changing. It was the first time I was confronted with what courage and determination it took to be a Jew. I saw young people my age ready to serve in the army to defend their borders at a time young people in my country were protesting and trying to avoid being drafted. That was powerful. Stanley and I married in 1973, and even though we came from very divergent Jewish backgrounds, we both took comfort in the importance and influence of all Jewish traditions that both of our parents instilled in us. My parents died too soon to have a strong personal influence on my children. However, the strong Jewish foundation they provided guided me in raising our wonderful son Josh and our precious daughter Melanie. Thanks to the influence of my sister Luann, my artistic muse, Stanley and I have been able to ensure our family traditions and life cycle events are important and filled with joy and creativity. Our goal of providing a Jewish home in every sense was first tested when we made the decision to move so far away to Sugar Land to start Stanley's medical practice. We were moving away from a strong Jewish community of friends, family, and congregation we were beginning to feel at home in, to live in a suburb where we knew no one and had 2 small children to raise while building a medical practice. The only thing we were sure about was that we would maintain a close relationship with the temple, no matter what it took or how much we had to sacrifice. It would be our lifeline to our Jewish home and support in providing our children with a strong Jewish identity. Little did we know at the time, our strongest roots to Jewish life and tradition would result from the family of friends we adopted as extended family. The Schiffs, the Sweeneys, the Heims, Polikoffs, and Chafitzes, who also shared our concerns and goals, were members of Beth Israel, and have remained the core of our Jewish Sugar Land extended family. I met Pat Polikoff at Beth Israel, where our kids were in the same Schlenker preschool class. Jan Schiff and I first crossed paths volunteering with child advocates and the Cancer Society in Sugar Land. Our friendship was forever cemented when our sons were on the same losing Little League team with two Jewish coaches who knew nothing about turning around a losing team. Jan and I bonded, trying to boost the morale with pep talks and spirit pizza parties, more child advocacy, specifically our own. My first encounter with Sharon Himes was waiting in a shopping center parking lot at 59 and Murphy Road for the JCC camp bus to deliver our children. These bonds of friendship were unexpected, but definitely welcomed, and have continued to grow to this day. Maybe not coincidentally, all of these involved a strong Beth Israel bond. We carpooled to Beth Israel even if it meant picking up kids at 2 schools twice weekly, battling 59 traffic, and barely getting home in time for dinner. However, I remember these carpool days as being so special. Having the kids' captive attention, no cell phones, actual conversations, a little eavesdropping on the latest school gossip, and playing Name That Tune. Our families quickly bonded, and we celebrated religious holidays and secular milestones together until our families multiplied to the point where there are too many to celebrate comfortably under one roof. No problem. Our newest tradition is Hanukkah and Latkes in the park with all of our grandchildren. Our Sugar Land family now numbers 46, including adults and grandchildren. Our extended family has always included many dear Houston friends as well. Schlenker Preschool was also the meeting place of one of my closest Jewish partners in crime, Jackie Levitin. The distance between Fondren Southwest and Sugar Land was never a deterrent in our holiday celebrations, BBYO activities, cooking, and sharing traditions and celebrations. Jackie was an important lifeline to the Houston Jewish community, keeping me connected, providing moral support, and a loving friendship. The circle of close family friends that I had grown to love and depend upon was shattered with the untimely deaths of Jackie and Jan within 6 months of each other. They were my rocks, and I felt their losses deeply. But their memories propelled me to draw others even closer and take comfort in the traditions and memories they had helped me to create. When we first moved to Sugar Land, there was no JCC, no Passover supplies, not even a bagel shop. However, these challenges gave me more courage and determination to share my Jewish values and address prejudice and anti-Semitism. One unforgettable experience was the time a neighbor's son called to ask if he could interview me on video about Judaism for his Church of Christ school project. I couldn't say no, but what would I say? Would he expect me to recite passages in the Bible? This experience caused me so much anxiety. I felt I needed to study and choose my words carefully. His parents would be watching. I agreed to participate, but no taping, and I wanted to know the questions he was going to ask ahead of time so I could prepare and maybe even have the rabbi check my answers. But thank God I had an epiphany. The answer to all these concerns became clear. I just needed to communicate that my sense of Judaism and way of life did not depend on my ability to recite scripture. It's a combination of study and living Jewishly, incorporating our traditions and values into our daily lives. In preparing for this day, I asked each of my children how they felt my Judaism influenced their lives. Their memories and thoughts sometimes surprised, but definitely assured me that my goal of nurturing their sense of pride had been realized. Both recalled fondly how we always opened our home and included our non-Jewish neighbors and friends in holiday celebrations, Hanukkah, Passover, even Breakfast. My daughter's best friend, Christine, lived across the street, and her parents often bragged that their Christmas tree had more Hanukkah than Christmas ornaments. When Christmas fell during the time Melanie spent winter break in Colorado with them, they made sure she had a menorah, lit the candles, said the blessings, and had latkes to eat. Inspired by our traditions, Christine chose to be married under a handmade chuppah, and to this day calls me every Hanukkah and Passover for tips while she's making latkes and matzo balls for her son. Christmas at elementary school in Sugar Land was always challenging for the few Jewish families. Each year, I made hundreds of latkes for the elementary school staff in my kids' classrooms. For many years, I took dreidels and told the story of the Hanukkah celebration until I was asked to stop when anxious parents, hearing their children's excitement about latke tasting and playing dreidel, thought I was trying to convert them. Melanie reminded me how special she felt when each year, faced with the assignment to make an ornament for the school Christmas tree, I encouraged her to make a Jewish ornament. By doing this, Melanie recounted that by respecting the assignment, the fact that hers was Jewish made her feel special. Josh's memory centered on the importance of our big holiday celebrations and how we were always opening our home to friends, no matter their backgrounds, unaffiliated Jews, and even new Beth Israel members with no family or friends to celebrate with. Both mentioned the importance of our support of their involvement in BBYO that frequently involved schlepping back and forth to Houston multiple times a day. But despite these challenges, we grew to love our community. Our children learned the importance of mutual respect and took pride in being Jewish. I'm grateful that Judaism has become a family affair. I take comfort that Melanie and Josh have both begun to incorporate our Jewish traditions in their lives. Living in New York, far away from family, Melanie created beautiful seders in her tiny apartment where she and friends wrote their own Haggadah each year with trendy themes like the Hunger Games Passover edition, or you don't want to pass over this meal. Josh has started leading our family Seder, and with his wife Andrea, emphasized the importance of Jewish traditions in their home. It's not uncommon to walk into their home and witness our grandson marching with his Beth Israel shofar or strumming his guitar singing Shabbat songs. I feel our dreams and goals have been realized. We have come full circle. My parents and grandparents' examples of leadership and community involvement influence my belief that the way to truly feel part of any community is to contribute, dive in, and be engaged. This is especially true of my experience at Beth Israel, where I now serve as a vice president of the board. My initial goal of getting involved some 40 years ago has led me to serve as Beth Israel president of the sisterhood, work on the Beth Israel Endowment Board, chair many events, committees, and even a clergy search, and also hosting go-to Shabbats in Sugar Land. I am currently reorganizing our committee structure at Beth Israel to welcome you, our congregants, into finding your own meaningful ways to get involved and make a difference for you, your families, and especially our congregation. All of these experiences have provided me and my family so much joy and satisfaction, with wonderful, diverse opportunities to practice my Jewish beliefs and strengthen the bonds of friendship I've been so fortunate to have found here. Stanley frequently jokes that his most significant donation to Beth Israel has been me as a volunteer, but his support behind the scenes has given me strength, encouragement, and a sense of great personal fulfillment in our long ago pledge to create a loving Jewish family. Always a work in progress, but so far, mission accomplished together. I only wish my parents had lived long enough to see the fruits of the seeds of Judaism they planted in me. But fortunately now, Stanley and I have the joy of joining Melanie, Josh, and our daughter-in-law, Andrea, to introduce our Jewish traditions and pride to our beautiful grandchildren, Noah and Alana. Lashana Tova.
Good Yontif. I'm honored to be here this afternoon, but I was a little reluctant. You see, I knew that agreeing to speak today would require an exposure of parts of my life that I usually keep to myself. I'm a Jew by choice. I've rarely talked about that to anyone here who did not already know. My mikveh was in January of 2009. I'm gay and married to Alan Hurwitz. We've been together 40 years as of last November. We've been living with HIV and AIDS for 30 years. That's it for the headlines. I hope it gets easier from here. I believe in the truth, so if we've been talking, I would have said so, but I might well not have brought any of this up. I worked as a psychiatrist, and you get good at deflecting personal questions. I'm a native Texan, so were my parents and their parents. I was asked once in Torah study before it started if I was raised religious, and I answered yes and let it go, as I could not see getting into my history in a room of people. But I was aware that we meant different things by religious. My family said thanks at meals, and if the doors of our Christian Bible-based church were open, we were there. There were no Jews, as far as I knew, and only a few blacks in the suburb of Dallas that I grew up in. To Jew someone was acceptable speech. I was in college before I realized it was offensive. I knew I was gay probably in junior high school, but that information was buried deep, even to me. I read a lot, did well in school, went with the family to church. I was an Eagle Scout. Throughout my life, if you'd asked me if I believed in God, I would have said yes. A lot of the time, though, it was like a wrestling match where I was just trying to breathe. So, I grew up in Irving near Dallas, college at Texas Tech in Lubbock, degree in German, medical school in San Antonio, residency in psychiatry in San Antonio, work in Houston, life complicated by HIV and treatments for AIDS in Houston, retired in Houston. Alan and I met in San Antonio. I was a second-year medical student. He was an intern. It was a relationship from the beginning. I remember that first year reading Leo Rosten's The Joys of Yiddish and joking with him that I guess that makes me the shiksa. At the start, we went to our own families for holidays. Alan would light the menorah, and I'd put up a small tree. We were an interfaith couple, but work and friends were primary, and religion was more to the side. Everything fell down that first year I was in Houston. Work was good, and I was on top of the world until we were both diagnosed with HIV. That was the plague then, like COVID-19 is the plague now. People you knew just got sick and died. There was no treatment. My doctor said to plan on about 6 months to get my affairs in order. I listed priorities, work, health, and Alan. I did a will. God was not much in the picture. That changed when my dad died suddenly in the spring of the next year. He was a healthy, overweight 62 who went to bed and didn't wake up. Kissed by God, I think they call that kind of death. It threw me back into church for a while here in Houston. At home for a time, I started reading Bible in a way I'd not done before. I would read the scripture and all the footnotes on each page. I would note verses that seemed to have a meaning for me. That was what I could do, is when I was not working, I had trouble watching TV other than the evening news, and books were leaving me cold. Slowly over time, things improved. Work was good. I was good at it, and doing triage or consultation psychiatry at the VA, you stay busy. I trained psychiatry residents and medical students. Years passed. For this part of my life, Alan and I were an interfaith couple at Beth Israel. I did church here and there, trying to make gay work with Scripture, trying to integrate what I knew to be true of the world from science with an understanding of God, trying not to throw the baby out with the bathwater. We would go to some Friday night services or Torah studies, but mostly Alan's yard sites and high holidays. I would go to everything with him that he wanted except Yom Kippur, as that was for Jewish atonement, and it felt like crossing a line to me. In 2000, we bought plots at the Beth Israel Cemetery. Several times since then, I've heard that the very first thing a group of Jews will do in a new community is buy land for a cemetery. That was when, to myself, I began wondering about Judaism for me. The Hebrew was off-putting, but I enjoyed reading about the Jewish faith and integrating that understanding with what I already knew and believed. In 2008, marriage for gays became legal in California. We had talked about it previously, and my input was always talk to me when it means something. In California, at least for a time, in 2008, it meant something. I told Alan I wanted us to no longer be an interfaith couple, and I wanted to meet with Rabbi Lyon and discuss conversion, as well as our California marriage. This was in April 2008. We rapidly moved from the idea of a courthouse wedding to finding a rabbi to do the ceremony. Rabbi Leah Novick agreed. We started adding religious aspects in a hurry. We found an appropriate ketubah. I bought a new Kiddush cup. We bought rings. We made travel arrangements, and we were off to San Francisco. We drove to Salinas, the seat of Monterey County, and for the first time in my life, we gave our names to the clerk and were issued a marriage license. We drove to Carmel by the Sea and met the rabbi and made arrangements for our ceremony the next day. Rabbi Novick brought two couples to hold the huppah for us. We signed the ketubah, blessed the wine, exchanged rings and vows. We're blessed in Hebrew. One of the four holding the huppah was a rabbinical student, and he read a blessing from Rabbi Lyon. We were truly blessed and happy. That fall, I started Hebrew with Dorothy Robbins of blessed memory, and basic Judaism with the clergy here at Beth Israel. My conversion was simplified a bit in that I was circumcised as a baby. So after a discussion with the rabbis, then a drop of symbolic blood and a blessing, followed a few days later by mikveh and blessings, I was a Jew. That was winter 2009, a Thursday. The parsha that week was Shemot. I think that was the year Susanna Heschel was a visiting scholar. I remember her talking of the people of Israel crying to God because of their slavery. She pointed out it's part of the cure to admit you have a problem. Then you can be helped. Good advice. I smile every time I remember my first high holidays as a Jew. It started with Slichot. Rabbis Lyon, Scott, and Miller, and Cantor Gerber were in the chapel with a small crowd, and they looked like a pro sports team at the start of a new season. So much energy and ready to start their season, all the way through to Simchat Torah with the scrolls spread on all the tables to be read. I continued with class through a second year of Hebrew. Then Alan suggested Melton classes. A new group of mostly women from Emmanuel Sisterhood was starting, and I stayed with them once a week for 8 years, from the basics of Judaism, denominations, Torah, the Middle East, to Israeli literature and translation. We lost a teacher studying Leviticus, Rabbi Judy Abrams of blessed memory. There were 2 bar mitzvahs, 1 divorce, 1 loss of a spouse in the core group, and as time went by, we added a few people. Alan and I light the candles and celebrate Shabbat every week. We celebrate the holidays. At Beth Israel, we were fairly regular at services and Torah study, especially the first few years. We've settled into a few times a month, yard sites, special services, high holidays, and classes. One class, we learned how to make matzah balls from scratch, along with a few other things in the kitchens here. At home over time, I added recipes like challah and chicken soup, honey cake and brisket, potato kugel, mostly from cookbooks. Alan's aunt taught me mandelbrot. Alan's family has always been welcoming. They include us at gatherings and for Rosh Hashanah and Passover. Passover's always been my favorite holiday. I clean out all the chametz, holding back a few crumbs to burn. We usually take the unopened chametz to Bray's Interfaith Food Bank. It feels like a double mitzvah. Before my mikveh, it was easier. As the goy in the house, all the chametz belonged to me, and Alan had matzah for a week. It felt strange this year not having Belden's to shop at. Under the shutdown, we had Passover on our own. Let me tell you about my most memorable Passover, a bit of history. When my mother's health and memory began to decline, we helped her move into senior apartments. And then for 10 years, I went up monthly to help her medications and appointments. I was blessed to get to know her as a person, and I hope she felt the same. When she died in home hospice from cancer, I was there with her. It was right before Passover 2018. Alan and I had a little Seder in our hotel room with matzah and wine, some other kosher food, and told each other bits of the Haggadah and talked of my mother. I cherish the memory of that time. My family gathered, and she was buried next to my father there in Irving. I followed Jewish mourning. I said Kaddish every time I could. At a year, I lit a yahrzeit candle that guttered the first day, so I thought it would go out, and then it kept burning for almost 2 full days. Right after that first yahrzeit, Alan and I followed her example and prepaid and planned our funerals. That's a hard thing to do, but one day I hope it makes it easier for who has to care for it. Over time, I have reclaimed God and worship while maintaining an acceptance of the flaws in Scripture and the reality of evolution and science. But I don't think I can make a sensible talk about that, other than to say that my understanding of God and Scripture is in a glass darkly. Talmud says Moses observed his prophecies through a clear-looking glass. All the prophets observed their prophecies through an obscure-looking glass. For me, it's as clear as mud, but sometimes the light still shines through. Kugel's God of Old and How to Read the Bible, Fowler's Stages of Faith, Campbell's Mask of God, Borowitz's Liberal Judaism, Heschel's The Prophets, and Lyon's God of Me, taken together with others, helped me sort my perspective. God does not change, but my understanding has evolved, allowing me to reclaim my faith in God at a deeper level. Torah or Scripture is not perfect, but God can be found there. People are not perfect, but they carry the image of God and can be inspired by the eternal. Our understanding of God is not perfect, but that's okay if we walk with God together. To grab hold of Etz Chaim, to be part of a people focused on life and the choices that lead to life, makes one part of something bigger, something more perfect than any single life. I look back over 40 years with Alan, some rough patches, but settled into love and comfort. Both of our families accept us. For a gay couple, that's a blessing. The IRS accepted our California wedding in 2008, so filing as a married couple even when California had a plebiscite and rolled back the right. In 2015, the Supreme Court allowed gay marriage everywhere. At our lawyer's suggestion, we repeated our marriage here in Texas, and Rabbi Lyon did the ceremony in his office. This year, the Supreme Court extended civil rights to employment to gays. I can hardly imagine being here now from the viewpoint of a little kid in Irving. We're accepted here at Beth Israel as a couple. And since I'm 11, still a kid in Jewish years, I'm starting to think about reading from the Torah in a couple of years. But for now, I pray that all of us are blessed with a healthy, sweet 5781, and that together we can rejoice when the current plague lifts and we can gather again here at Beth Israel.
Awesome. Go for it.
In 2009, I was pregnant with our first daughter when I stood above the steps leading into the mikveh. After years of study, private, and at Beth Israel, and months of preparation, I was converting to Judaism. With my husband Michael and Rabbi Scott standing in witness, the room was full of light and the still water before me. And when I submerged in the mikveh waters, the water held up both me and my baby in its own kind of womb, where I began a new relationship with God. As a new writer, not yet published widely and still searching for a creative practice, plus on the verge of becoming a new mother, it felt stabilizing to know we would find ritual and joy in establishing a Jewish household for our family. As Michael and I entered this part of our lives together as parents, I knew that raising a Jewish family would help shape who I was and how I interacted with the world, but I did not know how it would sustain our family in the worst of times and make our joy sevenfold in times of happiness. Michael and I had met as college sweethearts in 2000 at Rice University, where he endured reading my poetry and short stories, and I endured his long bouts of writing computer code to create a masterpiece of, say, a spinning rose on his computer screen, a computer's nerd's version of romantic creativity. It was love of opposites, a poet and a problem solver, the perfect scenario for two obsessive personalities, with a curiosity for learning and growing, and the dream of one day having our own family. What we did not know as we became parents to our daughter Maya, and then again to our younger children, Lily and Carlos, was how Judaism would sustain us and help us create a strong family life. After I gave birth to Maya, I struggled with the battle of postpartum depression, searching for a way to be the best kind of mother I could without knowing how I'd do it. Shabbat, family Shabbat events at Beth Israel, Jewish day school, as well as celebrations at the Purim Carnival and the rituals of holidays, became a constant touchstone for us during dark moments. No matter how we felt or how much we struggled, we knew that Shabbat would come and that there would be gatherings at the temple, prayer, and community, and the assurance that Maya was growing up in the warmth of a Jewish community, not just at Beth Israel, but through programs at the Jewish Community Center, and then as a toddler at the Schlenker School. It was only through the support of the community, my counseling with the rabbi, connections to resources, and finding words in the Torah that provided hope and healing, that Michael and I were able to figure out how to meet this first major challenge in our lives. Our struggles as a family changed course in the following years when I faced difficult pregnancies, spending months on bed rest at home or in the hospital, and feeling so grateful finally when our children were born healthy and seeing their faces made every second of struggle worth it. People in the Jewish community helped our children, nurtured and cared for them, and the community as a whole gave us stability and our children a place of certainty when our lives were in flux. Our children have now grown and continue to grow in the Jewish community at Beth Israel through religious school and Shabbat services, holidays, and gatherings. Now, even as I've developed an autoimmune condition that is sometimes debilitating, and most recently struggled with the long-term effects of what may have likely been COVID-19, I've come to appreciate in newfound ways the celebration of Shabbat in our home, the ritual and looking forward to holidays and seasons on the Jewish calendar. For 6 years, I've also found joy through teaching in Beth Israel's religious school, teaching Judaics to first and second graders, and more recently, art to all grade levels, which included having my children as my own students. My greatest joy as a religious person is using creativity to honor the sanctity of human life, either by practicing art with children, volunteering at the jewelry beading class at 7 Acres, or in my own practice as an artist. My journey as a Jewish woman has helped me grow as an artist because it has given me permission to question and challenge my initial ideas and beliefs, to create my own internal midrash, and chart my journeys in poetry and other artistic expressions. I'm currently the Houston Poet Laureate and have published collections of poetry as well as published stories, nonfiction, and more. But through this time of young parenthood, I had to find a way to flourish as a writer. Somehow, through a great amount of effort and persistence, and a wild belief in the worth of my writing and ideas, and with the reality that many writers have work that never gets published or recognition, I was able to publish 4 collections of poetry, as well as publish stories and essays widely. My growth as a writer whose work deals with family, motherhood, and confronting illness is inextricably linked to my life as a Jewish woman and to embracing the questioning nature of the Jewish faith, the ability to reinterpret or re-examine stories in the Torah, like rabbis before us, and create our own versions of midrash. I've followed my sense of curiosity and examined what could be questioned in my life, just as I learned and observed through my life as a Jewish woman. I could not have persisted, both as a mother and in my personal endeavors, if we did not have the touchstone of Jewish education and ritual, to have the support of the Jewish community as we raised happy and healthy children who learned eagerly about Torah and the practices that called us to be better humans through the lessons of the Torah. One of the most testing challenges I faced over the past 10 years was when I was having a difficult time walking or seeing clearly, a result of my physical symptoms caused by my disease. I felt estranged from my very active family, with children at the stage where going outside to play was critical for their happiness. I remember sitting at services and hearing Rabbi Scott and Rabbi Lyons speak of the hardships in Torah, and it made me feel included in the history of human lives who struggled with personal and communal hardships. At a sisterhood membership celebration, I clearly remember Rabbi Lyon speaking of the dignity of human life, no matter what physical abilities we have at any moment in our lives. The story he recounted was one of a family member suffering from a disease that left him with few physical abilities, and how he felt nourished and found joy in his memories that kept him company. I find it a very Jewish concept to believe that whatever present moment we live in, there's always value to living, whether we are confined at home, in our body, or in spirit. There's always something to be held sacred in the reality of our lives. I learned that the present and its available joys cannot be dismissed by the thoughts for some greater future, but instead is from the very happiness we know and experience right where we're at, where we currently exist. During this time of stay at home amidst the coronavirus pandemic, I had the opportunity to test this belief and to practice it. The present during these days can feel, at the worst of times, overwhelmingly tedious and quite frankly boring, and at the best of times can feel freeing as we enjoy the downtime and slow living without the rush of commutes and busy schedules. I ask myself during these times to find where my mind and body are free from confinement, what parts of my life are still blessed with joy and abilities, and how to teach these same ways of searching to my children. After contracting most likely the virus in March, my recovery took months, at the end of which I could walk down our block and back to our house. Each week I would walk farther and sometimes walk less than the next. I had to accept whatever my body could give me. I'm practicing acceptance for a new heart condition caused by the virus. And my life as a professional pro tennis player and bodybuilder is completely over. I'm grateful for the sun on my face, the blue sky that meets us most days, or the stormy one that comes to soften the heat. I'm grateful that our son is a proud kindergartner, learning to read and deal with big emotions in a kindergarten way. And our 8-year-old daughter is braver on her bike. I'm grateful that our oldest daughter, Maya, will enter an arts middle school with a new portfolio of comics, stories, and animation, which her vibrant mind has created over the summer. I'm grateful for the small moments Michael and I are able to share alone, to watch shows that make us laugh or make us think. It doesn't take much, really, to be this happy, and it certainly doesn't happen in a situation devoid of extreme challenges. In the midst of the worst part of the virus, when I could not sit up, I felt comforted by the voices of my children, of their glee and dancing, their games, sometimes coordinated at midnight for a very important opportunity to build Legos and create stories. I felt grateful also for the care my husband gave me so that I could get better. Each day is a chance to be with my family in a new way that cannot be repeated. In the end of each week, we can celebrate Shabbat together to remind ourselves that for this, we should be profoundly grateful. We have each other, the abilities and gifts given to us to use and enjoy. And when the pandemic passes, we will be in community with others again and find new ways to connect, just as we've stayed connected through the internet, texting, and video apps. It's not possible to leave this challenge without the newfound appreciation for a heartfelt hand on the shoulder, a friendly hug, or hands on another friend's hand. I hope when it happens, you enjoy it, even savor it, even if just for a moment, because these are the things that make up the present moments of our lives in ordinary times. And maybe we wish for more ordinary moments of connection that are cause for joy. Shana Tova to you all, and I hope very soon you are able to connect to others in the ways that are meaningful to you.